We should now be on a live mic. If you can hear us at Dog 3, please wave.
Yay!
All right. Ms. Williams? Oh, she's waving.
So Miss
Orozco, are you waving?
So our presenter is on her way. She's about to log on. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick roll call. Okay, so let's see here. We've got.
Why is he down in his office?
And by the way, I'm using a roster, so I'm just checking you off if I see you. If you have more than one person in your room, in your office, please let us know so that I can mark them off. Because right now I'm just marking off the people I can see, physically see.
You cannot see Rachel, and you cannot see Esmeralda.
Got it.
Erica will be absent today.
Okay. She did let me know. I know she's at the Social Studies Conference. And then from our campuses, I'm seeing Stephanie Cavazos. Okay. Well, so the purpose of our training today is two-part. First of all, we know we have to have required ELPS training. And so this is going to help us address that. Now, as part of the required training, truthfully, it would be a couple of days training, which we don't have time for. But the good news is that we are addressing this continuously through La Cosecha, through our two-way PSYOP training that we have at Cal, through pretty much almost every PD that we have. We are having conversations of how we're addressing the needs of all our language learners, Chinese language learners, English language learners, Spanish language learners. So the purpose of today, I'm about to turn it over to Carlene Thomas, who I believe has just joined us, who is going to share some information about ELPS and sheltered instruction, and then some. Hopefully everybody will come away with some additional tips on how you can coach your teachers to meet the needs of their linguistically diverse groups of kiddos. Ms. Thomas, are you ready?
I am. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I was on the other link that I sent out, so did not know we were over here. So happy to be with you guys today. And we are just going to be looking at, like I said, different ways that we can support our ELLs on a daily basis. The goal is for this information that I give you. In fact, the information I give you at the very end, I'll give you a reduced URL where you'll be able to access this presentation information so that you can turn these around to your districts in your different PLC meetings and such in the campuses that I won't be directly at physically. And so as we get going, if you can just open up open a browser and go to flipgrid.com, or if you want to open it on another tablet or device that you have, you want to download the free Flipgrid app. We're going to use that today during our session. And if everybody could go ahead and mute your mics, that will help. For now, go to mute your mics. As we have share out times, I'll have you kind of unmute those again to help us with those. As you have questions, of course, unmute a mic, or as we have discussion times, you can unmute your mic. But we are going to utilize a Flipgrid today. And so download that. And if you're having trouble with that, maybe message me in the chat as well. Someone asked about recording. And so, boom, we will begin. Okay, it looks like Dr. Crosco, you might have to start recording since I'm not the.
We're already recording on this side.
Okay,
We're good.
excellent. Okay, good. So great. That will be very helpful. Excellent. So how are we doing out there? Hopefully we are able to download the free app or open up flipgrid.com because we're going to use that today. So moving right along, like I said, today we're going to be focusing on just some of those basic things that we can do to support our ELLs on a daily basis and helping our teachers to know that a lot of the best practices that they're already doing are a great starting place to knowing how to support our ELLs and just expanding upon that. So taking a look at our content objectives for our time, we're going to be able to identify and describe some key elements of what does it mean to have linguistically accommodated content instruction to be used on the daily basis. So just some practical skills. And then, of course, our language objective is to be able to participants being able to discuss how our linguistic accommodations could be used in a particular lesson. And we're going to explore that together. And we're going to be able to hopefully post our ideas using our Flipgrid that you can go back to later. So take a moment just to skim this statement from Chapter 89, the Texas Administrative Code, kind of our ELL Bible in Texas. And I like to bring it back here to kind of help us recall and know where all of this information is coming from and why we're doing what we're doing. And so skim this statement from Chapter 89. And I just want you to pull out what are some of the key words or phrases that you notice. And if you want to unmute and just share out some of those key words or phrases, or if you want to even share them in the chat.
Hey, Carlene, I just wanted to, so what conversation we've been having district-wide here at IL Texas is that this statement right here from Chapter 89 is applicable to 100% of our kiddos. And that's what's exciting for us is even though this training, of course, the target audience here is our ELLs, and we have about a quarter of our kids are ELL. We actually have 100% of our kids that are language learners. So the district shall modify the instruction, pacing, and materials to ensure that English, Spanish, and Chinese language learners have a full opportunity to master the TEKS. Just FYI.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and as we keep in mind, of course, not only, for those that are identified as our ELLs, like you mentioned, of course, any of those that are opting in as well, all kiddos sitting in every single classroom across America, at least, of course, are academic language learners. Academic language is a second language to all. So really all kids are English language learners in the sense of that. And then, of course, per your model and per the program that you have, even more intensely. And I always say as well, good for all, necessary for some. We have to, and that's what we're really going to break down today as we look at the elements of effective instruction. We're going to be breaking down, this is good instruction for all students, but at the same time, if we're not being intentional and targeted to those kiddos that need it the most, we could still have kiddos that slip through the cracks. So what are some of those key words or phrases that you notice from this statement that would be key points? And for those of you that are in a large room together, you can feel free just to even chat about that together. Any of those that are watching remotely, you could put that in the chat, or if you want to unmute and tell us.
Mine is full opportunity.
Nice. Okay. Ensure someone chatted, or full opportunity. Absolutely. Any other key words or phrases? Oop, here comes one in the chat, a couple of them. All right, required curriculum, modify, master, nice. Okay, very good. Excellent. So first, obviously, notice some of those key words such as shall or ensure. So, of course, this is not something that we can take lightly for any of our students, in particular English language learners, that we shall modify. Now, you know, at first glance, I look at the word modify and I think, modify? We don't modify for ELLs. We don't modify that content. We accommodate. What? Modify? But notice very clearly what it's telling us to modify. Our instruction, our pacing, and our materials, right? So helping our teachers to realize, of course, we're not going to modify the content level. We're going to hold them to that same required curriculum, which includes the TEKS and the ELPS, that same mastery of those essential knowledge and skills, not just barely getting by, barely proficient, but actually mastery of those TEKS and ELPS. And we're going to modify our instruction, our instructional methods, our pacing, and our materials to ensure those things are happening, but not the content itself, not the curriculum itself. So keeping that in mind. Now, how do we do this on the daily? And to be frank, sometimes life can feel like this as a teacher. What do you think? Right? First day of school, we'll get it all together, you know, and this says March through November, but I mean, I feel like maybe it's longer. That last day of school, we got the coconuts on, right? And so the true situation is life as a teacher is real tough. The massive amounts of differentiation that's needed in the classroom. And I always say it's like we're expected to be Inspector Gadget. You know, oh, you have that need? Gotcha. I've got a trick. Y'all remember Inspector Gadget? Those of you that I can see, give me a little nod. Somebody, okay? Inspector Gadget, expected to kind of have a trick up this sleeve, a trick up that sleeve to support every student and every level and every difference in the classroom and reaching every kid at their level. It can feel very cumbersome. And so through the things that we're going to explore today, my goal is that we can help teachers take what they're already doing and take it and shift it slightly to be intentional and targeted to daily reach the needs of their ELLs and to break it down quite simply. And so by doing so, we're going to break down these types of accommodations for English language learners and the type of instruction that we're going to provide into these three targeted areas: focused vocabulary, enhanced interaction, and adaptive materials. So these are the three key areas that we'll be looking at in how to support the needs of our students, the diverse needs of our students. So first of all, the first way we're going to do this is I'm actually going to give you some time to explore. So to have you just think about and explore this idea. So if you've already opened up, how many of you, maybe give me a thumbs up if you've already opened up Flipgrid? Okay, so all you'll need to do is you can go to Flipgrid and just enter that grid code PK1EAU6, or just type in flipgrid.com / and then that code. Or if you're on the free Flipgrid app, you can also enter the code that way. So go ahead and take a second to type that in. I won't leave the screen for a second so that you can type that in. I'm going to also type this grid code. Oops. Sorry, guys. Hold on. I'm going to type this grid code into the chat in case you lose it and need it again. So I just sent that into the chat. So in case you need it again, and I'm going to go away from this screen for just a second. Okay. So a few things here. This is what I want you to do. I want you just to pick one of these areas, and if you're in that larger room and you've got some other folks next to you and you want to work on it together, that would be great. That'd be awesome. You're welcome to do that. But the 3 areas that we're going to be looking at today are those adaptive materials, enhances the interaction, and focused vocabulary. So what you'll do is you'll actually enter any of these 3 sections, open it up. It's going to have a link for you to explore the ideas related to that topic. So when you open it, it's going to take you to a group of Google Slides. And on those Google Slides, you're going to just think about, okay, what is she trying to get at about vocabulary as it relates to a box of donuts? What's that all about? What is this picture? What is that trying to? So you're just kind of exploring and wondering and thinking, what does this mean about classroom instruction as it relates to focused vocabulary? A few of the things have links. If there's any writing that have links, an underline like this, it's going to take you to a link. Sometimes it's the next slide to tell you that that connects, or sometimes it's a further link. If a picture has a little symbol like this next to it, then you'll actually click not on that symbol, but on the picture, and that will show you that there is a link of some further information for you to explore and think about. So, and then as you go back to the grid, it will have some discussion questions for you to look at. And you can see the responses of some of my previous participants who have looked at this, which you can also take a look at some of the things that they've said, or you can create your own video. With Flipgrid, you can look at my discussion questions here that I have for you. And then you click this plus sign here, and you'll be able to record a video where you'll be able to answer those questions. If for some reason that's creating a difficulty, especially in our webinar format, if that's getting kind of a little muddled, especially for those of you who are not in the larger room, you could also answer those questions as it relates to those areas in the chat. You could just type focused vocabulary and you could type your answer rather than record a video. So somebody turn off your mic and tell me, what are you about to do? What are you about to do right now? Do we know what to do?
I'll share. I'm looking at the focused vocabulary components, pulling up the link under the tips for internalization, playing with that, seeing what it is.
Absolutely. That's exactly what you're going to do. Thank you, Stephanie. So yes, you're going to just open, and you can start anywhere. And I'm going to give us about 7 minutes here to just begin exploring, and just start with any one of those areas, explore the materials, and answer one of the questions or some of the discussion questions.
Okay. Hey, Miss Thomas.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yes.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
I see that, it says ELL accommodations for busy teachers, which looks really good because that's how teachers are nowadays. But I'm just wondering, because I know that we put in an access code at the beginning. So is this kind of like a Google Classroom where you put in a code and only your people are there?
So for Flipgrid itself, like how to use Flipgrid?
Uh-huh.
So basically Flipgrid, the beauty of Flipgrid is that, first of all, it's free. Yay. Now I will tell you only one grid is free per email address. So I may or may not have about 4 email addresses, 4 different accounts. But what you can do, and with each grid, I can share either my whole grid where, like with you, I've shared the grid and I have 3 different topics. So you're seeing all the topics at once. Or I could share just one topic at a time, okay? And with Flipgrid, in thinking about using it in the classroom, for instance, the great thing is kiddos don't need an account, right? So all they have to do is just go to Flipgrid and enter your code, okay?
Yeah.
And like I said, you can enter just that topic or a whole grid. And then from there, you're able to, build in activities or that kind of thing. I don't think I'm answering your question, though. What were you thinking?
Like, I am very interested I'm always looking for ways to help out our ELLs. So then this looks really appealing to me. But I'm wondering, is this like a Google Classroom kind of thing where I've created, like these subjects, you created them and you put in kind of like lessons in there for them?
The content to go in there. I'm sorry, I was not answering your question appropriately, but yes. I created the content to go in there. In fact,
and I'm sorry. And then another question that I have, like, because I see it says it has 16 videos, for example, and then let's say the first topic says adapted materials. So then, if I have a classroom where I have, let's say, a 6th grade classroom where I have 3 ELLs, could I only have my 3 ELLs in that classroom, like from that classroom, and then 2 from my class there at the same time?
You're saying about, well, I'm thinking about this way. What I would probably do if I want them separated is I would create them under different topics so that their answers, if you're thinking more about the grouping of it, I can give any group that code and they just have access to, it's sharing topics, not classes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that answers my question. Yeah, because I'm just thinking not everybody in that class has to go into this. This is just a support for my ELLs.
Sure, I mean, you could do something with Flipgrid whole group, right?
Yeah.
And then incorporate.
Yeah,
and then
happens to have a topic that fascinates me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and think of it this way with Flipgrid. Now, by using Flipgrid, you have a house full of speaking skills, right? So when I want to go back to analyze how are my ELLs progressing in their speaking skills, I have a whole storehouse full of videos that they've created with their speaking skills. And
oh, I see. They can upload videos. Okay.
That's exactly what you do here with Flipgrid is you respond by answering a video response, okay? And I can also respond to other people's videos. That's how I answer the questions. As well, yes, and then as well, if I have posted a video, if I have posted in here a video and they actually had to watch the video and respond, now I'm also assessing listening, right? So
I love it. Okay.
Great, yay! That was a really great question. Thank you so much for answering or for asking those questions about Flipgrid itself, because it really is a great tool. And I appreciate as well some of you are answering some of those questions into the group chat, which is excellent. Looking at the different things that you've been exploring, as we've been going along here. And so I'm going to go ahead and start talking just because we have such limited time today. I want to make sure that I talk through some of these areas with you, but I wanted you to have a chance to explore. And now you can see how you could do a similar thing with Flipgrid in your classroom. So let's take a look at some of our first area, and that is focused vocabulary. So first of all, what do you think I was thinking with this box of donuts? If you want to unmute and share or share in the chat, what do you think I or with a box of donuts as it relates to vocabulary? Or am I just making you hungry?
I had a thought. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, so my thought was, you say, and there are lots of different varieties. So when we use new words, if we're not specific, I might be visualizing the one with the sprinkles on top, and you might be visualizing something more like an apple fritter. So we have to be really precise when teaching new words, because students might have a vague general concept, but they might not know exactly what we're talking about. So it's important we provide as much concrete reference as we can. And we all have different background knowledge. So to me, maybe a donut only comes with sprinkles on it, and you've never seen a donut with sprinkles on it in your schema. So we've got to go back to what we do and don't know and what's different for every child when we introduce new vocabulary.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Hey, I love that interpretation of the visual, and thinking about, I love how you talked about, accessing that prior knowledge, building on what those kiddos know. Love that. I see in the chat, someone also said there are different ways to use a word. It could have a different meaning to you. So again, that kind of goes in similar to what you were saying. And so choice. Ooh, I like that. Someone just added that to the chat as well. So there are two key words that I would give you as I think about related to focused vocabulary, and that is volume and value. Volume and value. So if you think about vocabulary, if I look at this box of donuts, what if I was to sit down and eat this whole box of donuts in one sitting? Let's just say it's not all going to be retained. Gross. I know that's a bad analogy, right? Sick. But, it's not all going to be retained. I'm not going to be able to keep that all down, if you will. And so no matter how delicious those donuts are, no matter how great your instruction is, your methods of instruction, sometimes too much is just too much. Okay? Sometimes too much is just too much when it comes to our vocabulary, especially for the levels of our English language learners. So that's one area that we want to make sure that we express to our teachers, and that is the volume of vocabulary that we're giving at once. So when we think about, for instance, pre-teaching vocabulary, we want to think about giving that in small chunks. You may have, think about especially secondary classrooms. I might have 30 words related to that unit or lesson. But instead of being like, well, here's 30 words and make a Frayer model for everyone. Right? Great practice, but overused, it loses its value. And so maybe instead I just pre-teach 4 or 5 key words. If you don't know what these words are, you're not going to know anything, okay? And when I say pre-teach, I'm not just saying, here's a dictionary, look up that definition, or here's my definition, and let's regurgitate it. We're about to talk about some internalization techniques that we could think about having our kiddos do to ensure that they are synthesizing that information, making connections to that prior knowledge, just as our folks were mentioning here earlier. So volume, and I would extend volume as it thinks, not only in relation to vocabulary, but just chunking of information in general. We have to build in time for reflection in our classes. If I'm just blowing through my notes, if I'm just blowing through my text or whatever it might be, and not leaving in any time for actual reflection or chunking of that material, sometimes too much is just too much. So we have to think about that volume, the amount that's being given at one time. And then secondly, value. How many of us realize not every donut is the same, right? You've got your Krispy Kremes, and then you got your gas station donut that's been there sitting there for 3 days. Yeah. And so not every donut has that same value, and not all of our words have the same value either. We have to think about that content-specific vocabulary, yes, but also what about some of that supportive vocabulary that's needed for academic discourse? The link that's provided here, and just to draw your attention to the link that if you click on the box of donuts, it will take you to a link with Isabel Beck's framework for vocabulary, she talks about 3 tiers of vocabulary. And those tier 2 and 3 are related to academic vocabulary. And she talks specifically about how for our English language learners, that tier 2 is so vital. Those words needed for academic discourse, those process types of words, analyze, observe, display, those types of words that are all over our assessments, and that students need in order to explain their content knowledge. So we have to think about what value are the words that I'm actually focusing on, and how can I focus on very key vocabulary that will give me the biggest bang for my buck, and then be able to chunk in the other vocabulary as we go along. So 2 key words, volume and value. Very important as we think about focusing in on our vocabulary, okay? And then, of course, we have to think about visuals. All right, let's see if this is gonna come up. There we go. So the eyeball, very clearly, I'm thinking here about our visuals, our visual support. Okay, now visuals. I bet if I interviewed every teacher in America and said, what's the number 1 thing you can do for your English language learners? I bet I would hear visuals in the top 2 things, right? So, but one thing to really keep in mind is this: visuals for the sake of visuals can be pointless. I'm just gonna let that kind of sink in for a second, right? Visuals for the sake of visuals can be pointless. Not all visual has a purpose. So just because I have a visual doesn't mean my students are engaging in it. Let me give you an example. Have any of you ever had a pointless word wall? And you can just keep that in your mind, right? I won't make you, type that into the chat. But let me just tell on myself. Year 2 of teaching in Dallas ISD, I was like, check this out. I'm going to have an awesome word wall. It's going to have pictures, right? So I would teach my little lesson, and then I would look up this little clip art, cut it out, put it on the word wall. Cute, right? Everybody walking by, love your word wall. Thanks, it's great, But problem is, did my students have any interaction with those pictures? No. Was it embedded in the lesson? No. Did they reflect on the meaning? No. Teacher fail, right? And so just because, again, if I have a word wall, I can check off the box that I have it, doesn't mean it's being effective. Just because I have, visuals in my PowerPoint, they're there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're being effective. Eventually my word wall in my classroom just became a wall of butcher paper, and we would write on it constantly. Oh, we don't know what that word means? Little Johnny, get up there and draw us a picture. What do you think it means? Let's talk about that. So having visuals that are purposeful, that students are actually reflecting on that meaning, thinking about. Notice how even as you reflected on the box of donuts, many of you had different conceptions of what that meant, but they were all so deep and different. And the more that we engage students in actually looking at that visual and deriving meaning from it rather than just regurgitating or not even picking up anything from that visual just because it's there. For instance, thinking about culturally responsive visuals. For the word communication, what if for the word communication I just have a megaphone? I put that up. Okay, guys, look, communication, a megaphone. Well, half the kids in my class may not even know what a megaphone is, right? But if I put up maybe a megaphone with like an emoji yelling into it, well, then now maybe they'll understand that it has something to do with speaking, okay? So keeping in mind what types of visuals we're using and how we're using it. Take gestures, for instance, right? Showing, I guess you can't really see me very well, but today we're going to talk about independent and dependent, right? You can't quite see my gestures here, right? But independent and dependent. So what do you think those words mean based on my gestures? Instead of just doing the gesture and hoping that by osmosis they figure it out, okay? So thinking about our comprehensible methods for focused vocabulary, visuals. Also, taking a look here at this picture. What do you think this picture is? What am I trying to say by this one? This tessellation. What do you think I mean based on that?
Is it one of, and I'm just taking a guess here. Is it one of those things, you know, where you look at them and somebody may see one thing and somebody may see the other, so it kind of seems like if, depending on the way you present information, it can be interpreted various different ways?
I think that's a good takeaway. That's not what I was thinking, but I like that. That's a good idea, right? Absolutely. So, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, making sure that we're not only connecting to their prior knowledge, but then helping to dispel misconceptions as we do so. Good thought. Thank you for sharing. So for me, the reason I put this symbol here, oh wait, somebody put something in the chat. Let's see if it can be abstract. We need to let kids explore. Love that. Thank you, Angela. Excellent. Yes. It can be abstract. A lot of our vocabulary words. So we definitely need kiddos to explore. Thinking about, for instance, the flip grid. And if I have a moment at the end, I can open up for you a sample lesson that I've used with Flipgrid in middle school. And having kiddos actually explore, what does, for instance, explicit or implicit mean based on just looking at a visual and helping them think deeply about that and drive meaning. So what I'm looking for here with this visual is repetition. As you can see with the tessellation, repetition. Repetition, 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 and repeat, right? So we have to provide opportunities for kiddos to frequently, over and over, have multiple opportunities to use and reuse the language again and again and again in all of the language domains. You know, and we can't say we're teaching academic language if we actually don't require kiddos to use it. And I can be very purposeful by providing support. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we talk about enhanced interaction. But even things like adding in a word bank, and as our kiddos have discussions over vocabulary, and ensuring that they're actually using those words over and over and over again and hearing them in different ways. So repetition is really the key factor I want you to think about as it relates to vocabulary. And then finally, those internalization techniques. Okay, and if you click on that link, it really just takes us to the next slide. And if you click that link and focus vocabulary, and these are just, I'm a nerd and I love, you know, the little acrostics here. But these are just some different tips for internalization that I've basically put into this acronym of GRASP. Okay, but just some things to think about how to diversify the different tools that we use in pre-teaching vocabulary. Sometimes it's easy to get into the same rut, right, and always do the same thing. So thinking about how can I change it up. And when I say these methods here, I'm talking about before I give a definition. So these would be exploratory ways that students are going to engage with vocabulary before they receive a definition. So first of all, gestures, right? Like I mentioned, I could just show a gesture while saying the word and ask kiddos to think about what they think that word means based on my gesture, just as I've kind of already explained or used that example. Rearrange activities. If you're in the focus vocabulary section on the Flipgrid, this link here will take you to a little short video that talks about word sorts and how to use them in the classroom. And the reduced URL here will take you to kind of a how-to. So it's a good little resource if a teacher is new to using word sorts in the classroom. Okay, so you can take them to that resource. So if you think about with a word sort, I could have kiddos, now I can use words and definitions, words and pictures, words, pictures, and synonyms or antonyms. Have kiddos lay those out, categorize the words based on their own knowledge, give titles to those categories, and then negotiate the meaning of why they grouped them that way. So thinking about the higher order thinking that we're putting into that. And then also I can use that same activity as a post-assessment after that unit or lesson. So that rearranging, and you're like, okay, great, thanks, Carlene. Yeah, my teachers are going to be up all night making, cards. Appreciate that one. No, I think there's a couple ways that we can also think about making this very practical. Number one, using resources where some of those things might even be already developed, like Quizlet or other resources where they might already be developed. And what about instead of having, you up at 3 a.m. cutting out those materials, or the eager beaver who finishes everything first, have him or her cut out those materials? What about my kiddos that are lower language proficiency? What about involving them and helping me create some of those materials? Because they're going to be getting that preview of that information. So again, kind of that small tweak to, and increases their exposure to the vocabulary, and hey, it saves me time as well. So rearranging to help them think about internalizing language, altering the part of speech, showing them, the same word. And so maybe on your word wall materials or the various, vocabulary journals or places that you have that information, show them that information in various parts of speech. Cognates. The link here in your Flipgrid will take you to my favorite Spanish cognates website, SpanishCognates.org, which helps because it categorizes both in alpha and then also by content area. So it can help to not only build that understanding of those words for the teacher, but then also providing those for support for students. So maybe showing them those to see if that triggers. Sometimes our kiddos, for instance, if I'm a Spanish-speaking background kiddo, that's my native language. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm fluent in that language or that I know that content material in my native language already. However, cognates can still be beneficial because, that sounds a little more familiar, right? The placement of that accent mark or the addition of the prefix or suffix in that partial cognate, that actually just sounds a little more familiar, or I can associate to it a little bit better. Using that word in the sentence context, maybe one that they're going to see in a later text, and just pulling that sentence out and having them try to figure out the meaning that way, or just making a basic prediction. So predicting what is it that this word might mean just based on how it looks, how it sounds, where might have I heard it before, what does it look like? So just a couple ways to think about that focused vocabulary and how to have kiddos internalize through exploration that meaning. And if you go again to that focused vocabulary section, there are a couple discussion questions here. And I want you just to take a second by yourself, even just to think about, for instance, what are some key elements when planning effective vocabulary instruction for ELLs? So what do I need to take into consideration that we mentioned? And what is the value of using internalization techniques before providing a definition? So just internalize that answer to yourself for just a moment. All right. So I'm going to keep us rolling because we got a lot to do still. So our next section is enhanced interaction. And hopefully some of you are able to explore that as well on the Flipgrid. But another key area for on the daily, supporting our English language learners, particularly in the classroom, by enhancing interaction, because notice the subtitle here helps to build that confidence for increasing academic language. Now, I'm just going to give it to you plain on this picture. I'm talking about reflection time, and I've already kind of mentioned it, right? Building in times for reflection, chunking the material that we provide for students by building in reflection time. For instance, we can help support teachers to do this by take your content and language objective for the day, flip that content objective into a question, and then that question, whether you want to call it an essential question, what target question, whatever, come back to that question repeatedly throughout the lesson. And then based on your language objective, the output would be determined based on that. So, if I have a writing objective for the day, they're constantly going back to add to their understanding based on that period of the lesson, that portion of the lesson. Or if it's speaking, Okay, we're gonna have that quick discussion on that essential question based on this portion of material that we've just talked about. Building in time for reflection. And there is a link here as well. If you click on that link, it's actually gonna take you to the next slide. Because again, I think that some teachers think that reaching ELL sheltered instruction is some far off magical unicorn over here that's like this unattainable thing, or something that's way out here. But what I want to help teachers to see is that using these methods of instruction is taking what you're already doing and being intentional and targeted, expanding it. So let's take our basic strategy, think, pair, share. Okay, roll the eye. Yeah, think, pair, share. Great, Carly. Never heard that one before. Revolutionary, right? But actually, sometimes a think, pair, share can go like this in the classroom. Okay, everybody, think about it. Okay, now talk to a partner. Okay, who has an idea? Right? And so sometimes that can actually go so quickly, and we don't actually embed that time for thinking. So I want to break it down a little bit. Think. What about instead of just that, very quick pause for thinking, I actually build in some wait time with a wait time technique. Like, okay, when you have your idea, stand up, right? When you have your idea, put your thumb at your chest, whatever. I've had some elementary teachers say, put your finger on your nose, but I feel like they might pick. So I'm not sure if we should do that one. But anyways, or even just, guys, we're going to start our conversations in, and then I'm just counting down, pacing myself, pacing them. And then also, of course, adding in the writing component. Write down your idea. I could even enhance this a little bit more by, now that you've written down your idea, before you talk to your partner, put your hands over your ears and whisper read that answer to yourself to practice, right? So I'm enhancing that reflection time. Then as we go into that pairing time, I can support the pair with a sentence frame, okay? And there's a link in the previous slide with that as well, that will take you to a resource for generic sentence frames. And whether you want to call it a sentence frame, sentence stem, sentence starter, whatever. If we're not already using sentence stems, we need to encourage teachers, start today. It's the easiest low input thing that we can do to yield a high gain for students, both for speaking like here, and then also for writing. And the great thing about sentence frames, guys, that we have to remind teachers is sentence frames are not just there to scaffold down, if you will, but also scaffold up. What if as they go to do their discussion, I put one simple sentence on the board and then one compound or complex sentence structure on the board, right? So here, before you have your discussions, here's a couple ways to start. The Civil War began because. That's my simple sentence. And then my next one says, due to various factors, comma, the Civil War started when, right? So now I'm modeling not only just simple sentence structure, but also advanced sentence structure. And I can target it even more by going over to, little Johnny, who's one of my advanced kiddos I'm trying to push to advanced high, and say, hey, little Johnny, when you go to have that conversation, I want you to try to use that second sentence stem, right? Or when you go to write that exit ticket or whatever, target that second one. So sentence frames. I mention word banks as we pair to ensure that kiddos are using that vocabulary over and over. Now let me talk about the strategic partnering. When it comes to strategic partnering, I'm thinking about setting roles, okay? So for instance, as you pair up, decide who's going to be person A, person B, right? Person A, as you're going to first, in this first round, you're going to explain your answer. So they're going to explain whatever they thought out. Person B, you're going to respond. You're going to respond by giving a question or a statement of agreement or disagreement. I agree because, I disagree because. I could even have the whole class orally repeat that. And the more that they use that technique, they'll be able to do that more naturally and know more how to ask those questions. And then we're going to flip-flop. Now person B, you explain, and person A, you're going to respond. So notice, instead of just, okay, turn and talk, when folks turn and talk, many times that higher proficiency kiddo is going to talk over that lower proficiency kiddo. And that lower proficiency kiddo may actually never participate. So by assigning those strategic partners, now nobody gets to opt out. Both people are supported with the supports I've put in place, the frames, the word banks, the practice, the thinking ahead of time. And they're also focusing on listening skills, which are being targeted with feedback from their partner, right? So again, taking this basic strategy and blowing it out, right? Really expanding it out. Lastly, then, that share portion from our Think, Pair, Share. Our ELLs can really get lost in those conversations at times. So maybe as they're sharing out, I list some of the key points that kids are sharing, just a key word or phrase on the board to help them track the conversation. Maybe I go and point to some of the instructional materials to help them refer to what we're talking about. So again, taking this basic strategy and really pulling it out, expanding it out, to reach the levels of our kiddos in the classroom. Now, of course, I've shared with you those sentence frames, but then also paragraph frames. Can you guys see that reduced URL there? Okay, and at the end, like I said, I'll be giving you a link to this whole presentation information, and you'll be able to just click on it. But paragraph frames, an extension of that sentence frame, also helps to support our English language learners with the use of the academic language. Not only how to start, but how to go from sentence to sentence and how to close up that paragraph or extend to another one. So another very important support for our English language learners. I wish I had all day to talk to you about them, because honestly, I've seen the exponential growth that paragraph frames can provide. When I taught 7th and 8th grade newcomers in Dallas ISD, they were writing 5-paragraph essays in months. Is that because I was some rock star teacher? No. It's because I gave them paragraph frames, right? And so it's all about just providing that structure, reduces that anxiety level, that lowers that affective filter, builds that confidence where they're able just to focus on meaning rather than structure, okay? Also, I just want to highlight, and I don't really have a lot of time to go into them, of course, we talked a little bit about Flipgrid. So again, thank you for that question, because it helped me to talk a little bit more about Flipgrid earlier. But also another way to have some of that enhanced interaction is through Voxer, if any of you are familiar. And again, I don't have time to go into it today, but a resource where you can actually house and store students' listening and speaking skills. So just other ways that you can have kiddos practice using language repeatedly in the classroom, some technology tools to do that. And so finally, we've already passed through this section. Finally, the last area that we have to look at is that adapted materials and helping to provide that scaffolding that leads to independence. We don't want to forget, scaffolding should lead to independence, right? So based on the level of the kiddos, we're trying to get them to that independent level. So a couple resources to think about. First of all, again, I feel like at times teachers might, we hear about differentiated materials or adapted materials, and, I'm getting that feeling in my mind like, yeah, I'm going to be up till 3 a.m., bloodshot eyes, trying to make a new paper for every kid. Oh my God, right? And helping our teachers to feel a little bit less stressed about that by recognizing various ways we can adapt materials that don't take all night. And so, for instance, the readability of the material and the link that this graphic takes you to in your Flipgrid, if you click on that book there, it will take you to a little resource. It was a joint venture by UTA and TEA. And it basically just has an article that has some really great examples on how to break down adapting text, but not only for the linguistic changes, but also just for readability. Sometimes, again, just lowering that affective filter, helping kiddos to approach the material by chunking it. And chunking it can mean physically cutting it. It could just mean, hey guys, guess what? We're only going to read this first page today. Helping kiddos to know and feel comfortable about that, or by pre-teaching vocabulary so they feel comfortable to approach that text. Increasing the white space on the page. so it doesn't look so cumbersome, or increasing the font, adding in visual support, be it on the page or off the page. These are ways that we can actually just change the readability of the features of the text that can actually help kiddos approach the text much easier. And then, of course, thinking about some of those linguistic supports. Give me a nod. Those of you, I can see a few people right now on my screen. Give me a nod if you know about Newsela, or I call it Newsela, News ELA. Now, I love newsela.com, and I'm not going to actually take us to the site since we're running low on our time. But with News ELA, you can, of course, free printable materials in both English and Spanish. Now, it really only goes down to about a second grade level. If you need lower, ReadWorks is another site that has some good ones. Also, for my upper secondary teachers, check out Common Lit. Common Lit is another great one, like common, like we have something in common, and then LIT. Okay, another great resource that you can get different lexiles of text to support that adaptation material, which is prepared for you. And I would encourage our teachers with this, of course. As we think about sometimes these supports, we may want to use those as side-by-side resources, whether it's the lower lexile or the English or Spanish. Use it as a side-by-side resource to support with that as a scaffold rather than a replacement. And then finally, I want to talk about even adapting things like our notes or our graphic organizers. Sometimes it's easy to think, well, check the box. I'm using a graphic organizer, reaching my ELLs, right? But the graphic organizer alone is not the scaffold, okay? So, or that, type of note-taking may not actually be the scaffold. So let's take a basic Venn diagram, okay? Let's say I give a Venn diagram to my kiddos, blank, right? It's kind of like that inevitable interview question. Tell me about yourself. Well, I was born in Kansas. And I mean, where do you want me to start, right? I actually was born in Kansas, and I did use that in an interview, but I got the job, so whatever. But, so graphic organizers, that blank graphic organizer may not actually be supportive of my English language learners. So of course I can do things as well, like model the process and things, but here's a couple other ways I can expand it. For instance, I could add some subheadings. Here are some key areas that I want you to discover or write about as it relates to this topic. And then adding a sentence frame in the center to help guide that comparison, as we've already talked about. And then what about beforehand, instead of me just giving a couple examples or modeling, what if they actually did a type of word sort or even a discussion over visual aids to help them with preparing for the material that they're going to use in that graphic organizer. And then finally, sometimes we're like writing, check, we did a graphic organizer, done, writing, but that's usually note-taking and not necessarily writing it out. So extending that graphic organizer by having kiddos then take that into full sentences with the support of things like a paragraph frame, something again that is going to help them to organize that information and extending that. So taking that key concept and extending it, okay? All right. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm just like, but I just want to make sure I kind of give you all of my thoughts on this so that you can help to turn this around to your folks. This last piece that I just wanted to talk about is coming with some shared expectations for language objectives. Okay, sometimes we have a lot of different ideas as to what those language objectives are and can be. And particularly as you turn this around in your PLCs, I want us to target some of these key ideas about as it relates to how to write a language objective or what it means to have a targeted language objective. And then further, as we get, into our further work with our teachers throughout the school year, I'm hoping that we can break down a little bit more specifically some of these ideas, such as what is communicated, sequenced, and scaffolded instruction. But number one, you're going to basically think 1 to 5 when it comes to writing language objectives. Number one, you only need one language objective per lesson, just one. Even I might be reading, writing, listening, speaking, using learning strategies all day, every day. Go you, that's awesome. But which one am I gonna formally or informally assess that day? Number two, we're gonna connect to the content objective. So ensuring that alignment to the natural flow of my lesson. So I'm connecting to that content objective. And then for three, we're thinking about those three functions. These three functions are actually mentioned in the ELPS document, chapter 74.4 of our Texas Administrative Code, of that our linguistically accommodated content instruction should be communicated, sequenced, and scaffolded. And really, the methods that we've just spoken about with focused vocabulary, enhanced interaction, and adaptive materials is exactly that, communicated, sequenced, and scaffolded. So we're going to implement our ELPS with those three functions. 4, we're going to apply to all 4 proficiency levels. I don't need a different language objective per proficiency level of my classroom. I can have the same language objective, but the outputs that the different proficiency levels are going to give that in might be differentiated, and the support levels that I'm going to provide for kiddos at different proficiency levels will be different, but the language objective is the same. And then lastly, 5, I'm thinking that for my language objective, I need to vary my use of all 5 strands of the ELPS. Like, do teachers know there actually are learning strategies? That's a whole section of the ELPS, right? And so varying that up. And one resource that I can share out, maybe through Vera, and send out to you guys as well as a resource, is just like an ELPS personal checklist for teachers, where just very basic, but just you wouldn't have to create it. An ELPS, here's all the ELPS, and then here's where I can put when I've used them. And I wouldn't use this as any kind of, evaluation tool, but more of a self-evaluation tool for teachers to kind of monitor, ooh, I've been doing a lot of speaking, but have I really addressed listening, or helping them monitor themselves, And if my kiddos are all at a advanced level in speaking, then why am I doing and discuss every single day for my language objective, right? So how can I vary that? Okay. Well, I know this was super fast and furious with our time today, but jot down that reduce URL right there to the left of the screen. I hope that's the same direction for you. But doo.gl/, don't forget it's case sensitive, and that's capital A-C, little o, big J, little e, big E. And so jot that down, because that reduced URL will take you to this presentation information, the Google Slides, so that you can use that in your PLCs with teachers as well. And then my contact information is there. Carlene.thomas@region10.org. And if any of you are on Twitter, you can follow me there as well and connect with me there as well. I appreciate your time and attention. And I'm really here to support your schools, and I'm excited about the roles that you're going to play in reaching your teachers with this information. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Carlene. We appreciate you.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a great one. Thank you, team. Y'all have a great afternoon. Hopefully you found this information useful, and certainly it's applicable to not just our ELL kids, but all of our learners. So thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now. Vera is going to send this out to us, in particular to the handful of people that were not able to join us. Adios.